In the heart of the endless Egyptian sands lies one of the most mysterious stories in the world's military history. 50,000 soldiers of Napoleon Bonaparte set out to conquer the ancient land of the Pharaohs and disappeared without a trace. What happened to this army? Disease, war, or something greater, hidden in the eternal silence of the desert? Today, we will embark on a journey through the pages of the past to understand how the sands of Egypt wiped a great army from the face of history. The French army, led by the ambitious General Napoleon Bonaparte, left the shores of France in the summer of 1798. Their destination was Egypt, the ancient land of pharaohs, sandstorms, and treasures hidden by time. Napoleon's strategy was grandiose: to cut off the British Empire from its colonies in India, destroy its economic power, and forever change the balance of power in Europe. The expedition included about 50,000 people: soldiers, officers, scientists, and engineers. It was carefully planned. Ships, supplies, and artillery were gathered. Among the participants were future luminaries of science. It was thanks to this expedition that the world learned about discoveries related to ancient Egypt. The journey to Africa was fraught with danger. The British fleet, led by Admiral Nelson, pursued the French Armada across the Mediterranean Sea. However, Napoleon managed to reach the Egyptian coast before the enemy caught up with him. In July 1798, French troops landed near the city of Alexandria. The first impression was deceptive. The sands of Egypt greeted them with suffocating heat, a lack of drinking water, and hostility from local tribes. Despite this, Napoleon remained confident. He believed that he was in control of his destiny and would be able to conquer not only Egypt, but also the East. This campaign was a mix of dreams of glory, scientific progress, and imperial ambitions. None of the soldiers who set foot on the hot shores of Egypt at that time suspected that many of them would never return home, and that the army itself would become part of one of the greatest mysteries in human history. Thus began the great adventure that was supposed to lead to the triumph of France, but instead turned into a tragedy shrouded in the sands and mysteries of ancient lands. The French army marched deep into Egypt, carrying with them dreams of victory and great discoveries. A few days after landing, Napoleon led his troops to Cairo, the heart of the country. On the way, they faced their first serious test: the Battle of the Pyramids. In July 1798, on the banks of the Nile, the Mamluk army, formidable horsemen and heirs to centuries-old military traditions, attempted to halt the French advance. Their forces numbered more than 30,000 men, while Napoleon had about 20,000 soldiers. But it was here that the genius of the young commander was revealed. In the famous Battle of the Pyramids, Napoleon used the square formation. Soldiers lined up in tight squares capable of repelling cavalry attacks. The Mamluks, rushing into furious attacks, were unable to break through the French lines. The defeat of the Muslim troops was complete. Cairo fell. Egypt seemed conquered. However, behind the outward glamour of victory, the first signs of impending disaster were already beginning to appear. The heat exceeded 40 degrees, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the desert plains. French soldiers suffered from lack of water, sunstroke, and fatigue. The food supplies that the French had been counting on were almost empty. In addition, Rumors of strange diseases began to spread through the camp. People complained of severe fever, stomach inflammation, and sudden exhaustion. The field medicine of the time was virtually powerless in the face of tropical diseases. The psychological state of the army deteriorated. The sands of Egypt, which at first seemed only an external obstacle, began to penetrate the souls of the soldiers. They felt cut off from their homeland, surrounded by hostile land, where every sip of water was obtained with a fight. The victory at the pyramids brought Napoleon glory, but behind the facade, the seeds of disaster were already ripening. While the French celebrated their triumph, the sandy winds and ancient diseases began their invisible but relentless harvest. After its brilliant initial victories, the French army found itself in a situation far from triumph. Settling in the fertile valleys along the Nile, the French attempted to build a life in a foreign and hostile land. However, the harsh reality of Egypt soon shattered their illusions. The main problem was the heat. The temperature in the shade exceeded 45 degrees Celsius, and in the open sun, the sand became so hot that it burned the soles of boots. Water was a luxury, and wells were often poisoned or dried up. The French, accustomed to the temperate climate of Europe, fainted from overheating, suffered from dehydration and sunburn. The food also left much to be desired. Local food supplies were unstable, and provisions brought in from France quickly spoiled. The soldiers ate mainly bread made from coarse flour, dates, and rare portions of meat. Vitamin deficiency led to the widespread spread of scurvy and other diseases. Another threat was the exotic nature of the environment for Europeans. Poisonous snakes, scorpions, and swarms of insects attacked the camps at night. Malaria, dysentery, and other tropical infections began to rage among the soldiers. Field medicine could offer only primitive remedies: bloodletting, poultices, and rare powders. Help often came too late. The morale of the troops plummeted. Many soldiers wrote letters home full of anguish and despair. Others began to believe in strange superstitions. Legends about the curses of the pharaohs and ancient forces protecting the Egyptian lands were passed from mouth to mouth, intensifying fears. Some claimed to hear strange moans coming from the ruined tombs at night. Napoleon tried to keep the army under control. He established scientific societies, ordered the study of local culture, and attempted to turn the campaign into something more than a military expedition. French scientists described monuments, excavated antiquities, and studied mysterious writings. It was during these years that the Rosetta Stone was found, which later made it possible to decipher ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. However, enlightenment and science could not extinguish the real threats. The French army was melting away before their eyes. Dozens of people died in hospitals every day. Many surrendered without a fight, defecting to local tribes or simply disappearing into the endless deserts. Over time, the soldiers began to perceive Egypt not as a trophy of war, but as a trap. The land of sun and sand slowly but surely wore down their bodies and souls. The French army became prisoners of their own ambitions. Thousands of kilometers from home, forgotten, surrounded by danger, fighting not only their enemies, but also the deadly elements every day. At first, rumors of illness spread slowly through the camp. Soldiers complained of fever, convulsions, and strange spots on their skin. The field medicine of the time had no means of combating such symptoms. It soon became clear that a plague had broken out among the French troops. The epidemic began in Alexandria and quickly spread to the troops stationed along the Nile. The sick first felt weak, then developed a high fever and painful swellings, or buboes, under their armpits and in their groins. Within a few days, many of the sick died in terrible agony. Upon learning of the outbreak, Napoleon ordered the sick to be isolated. Temporary hospitals were set up, cramped, stuffy buildings where the wounded and sick lay side by side, passing the infection to each other. There were not enough doctors. Medical knowledge at the time was extremely limited. The only means of combating the disease were bloodletting, poultices, and desperate prayers. Fear gripped the army. Soldiers began to avoid each other, afraid of being infected by their comrades. Discipline collapsed. Many deserted, abandoning their weapons and equipment in the hope of hiding in the deserts or among the local villages. Some fell into apathy, awaiting inevitable death. Napoleon understood that the epidemic could destroy his army faster than any enemy. Legend has it that he personally visited hospitals to inspire his soldiers, showing that he was not afraid of the disease. According to contemporary accounts, Napoleon walked among the dying, touching them with his hands, a gesture of desperate courage or carefully calculated PR. Historians argue whether this visit was real or just part of the mythology created later. But the fear in the army subsided only briefly. The situation was exacerbated by the fact that, due to the destruction of the French fleet at Abu Qir in August 1798, the army was completely cut off from supplies from France. Letters, medicines, fresh food, everything stopped coming. The French were left to fend for themselves. Over time, the scale of the disaster became terrifying. Official reports spoke of mortality rates of up to 50% in some units. In some hospitals, there were no survivors at all. Both officers and ordinary soldiers were dying. Faced with an unknown and relentless enemy, the army was falling apart. Entire companies disappeared in the silent deserts and palm groves. Soldiers who fell ill on the march did not make it to the hospitals and dropped dead on the road. Sometimes they were simply buried in the sand or left behind to avoid the risk of infection. The sandy winds quickly erased all traces of their existence. Where yesterday there had been a camp or a column, the next day there was only a smooth desert. The French army, once proud and invincible, was crumbling under the blows of an invisible enemy. The plague was not just a disaster for them. It turned into a nightmare that the soldiers explained not only by disease, but also by the revenge of the ancient spirits of Egypt. And although many tried to explain what was happening rationally, deep down everyone understood. The ancient land of the Pharaohs did not forgive foreigners who came with swords. One of the main pillars of Napoleon's campaign in Egypt, the fleet, was destroyed in one fateful night. In August 1798, a British squadron under the command of Admiral Nelson caught up with the French fleet in Abu Qir Bay and almost completely destroyed it. The battle was a disaster. French ships exploded, burned, and sank one after another. Only a few managed to escape and head out to the open sea. The troops left on shore were trapped, without supplies, unable to retreat, and with no hope of rescue. Isolation proved to be almost a death sentence for the army. Communication with France was lost. Only a few couriers were able to make their way across the Mediterranean under constant threat of capture by the British. Messages took months to arrive. The replies came too late to change the course of events. Without regular supplies, all problems worsened. Gunpowder and weapons wore out, and medical supplies were rapidly running out. Even the soldiers' clothes were falling apart. Their uniforms turned into rags under the scorching sun and ubiquitous sandstorms. The morale of the troops deteriorated with each passing day. In desperation, people came up with the most incredible rumors that French generals had formed secret alliances with local tribes, or that Napoleon had left Egypt and abandoned them to their fate. At times, it seemed as if the very land of Egypt had come to life to wipe their traces from the face of the earth. With no news from Europe, the army sank deeper and deeper into a state of abandonment. Many began to see their situation as hopeless exile and themselves as lost forever. The sands, which at first seemed only part of the landscape, became a barrier separating them from home. The soldiers lost not only their health and faith, but also their sense of time. The days stretched into an endless series of marches, illness, and fear. Far from home, cut off from the rest of the world, they began to disappear. Not instantly, not in great battles, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, one by one, dissolving into the merciless desert of Egypt. When the French first landed in Egypt, their ranks were orderly, their discipline strong, and their confidence boundless. But with each passing month, the army seemed to dissolve into the sands, losing soldiers not in battle, but in a slow, exhausting struggle against invisible enemies. The reports from commanders became increasingly alarming. Individual battalions sent to outposts or caravans sometimes disappeared without a trace. People died from disease, dehydration, and sudden attacks by Bedouin tribes. But often, they were simply not found. Sandstorms instantly swept away the tracks of marching columns, burying entire units under thick layers of sand. One of the most sinister stories was the fate of a battalion sent to the oasis of Bahariya. According to the plan, they were supposed to return in 3 weeks, but the detachment never appeared. Groups sent to search for them found only scraps of clothing, broken barrels, and traces of a camp half buried in sand. No bodies or obvious signs of battle were found. The soldiers began to whisper about curses. They said that those who ventured too far into the desert violated ancient taboos and disappeared at the will of the spirits. Near the places where people disappeared without a trace, they found the ruins of ancient tombs and half-ruined temples. These discoveries only intensified their fears. French officers tried to maintain order, blaming the nomads and harsh conditions for what was happening. But in the hearts of many soldiers, a fear of Egypt itself took root, a land that seemed to hate their presence. In addition, constant skirmishes with the Bedouins were wearing down the troops. These warriors knew the desert like the back of their hands. They could attack at night, sneak into the camp unnoticed, cut down the sentries, and disappear, leaving only blood on the sand. The physical disappearance of the regiments went hand in hand with their moral decay. Soldiers deserted more and more often. Some tried to hide among the locals, others sought their fortune elsewhere, but most simply died in futile attempts to survive. Napoleon's army, once a symbol of France's power, had turned into shadows wandering among the merciless sands. And every day, the Egyptian desert erased more names from the pages of history. Amidst the sands, the ruins of ancient temples, and tombs buried by time, the French army unwittingly came into contact with something that went beyond the limits of the European perception of the world. The locals whispered about curses guarding the land of the Pharaohs, and soon the fears of these stories penetrated the hearts of the French soldiers. The researchers accompanying the expedition enthusiastically excavated ancient monuments, studied mysterious writings and rituals immortalized on stone slabs. But the soldiers themselves saw these excavations not as scientific interest, but as disrespect for the spirits of the dead. Stories of night visions began to appear. Soldiers reported that strange figures came to them in their dreams, tall, wrapped in linen shrouds, with faces hidden under golden masks. Some claimed to hear voices whispering in an incomprehensible language from the depths of ancient temples. A case in the vicinity of Memphis caused particular alarm. During the excavation of one of the tombs, several people suddenly fell ill and died within a few days. Observers attributed this to the wrath of the gods, although historians tend to believe that the cause was infection with ancient mold spores prevalent in the closed chambers. Nevertheless, the legend of the curse only grew stronger. The commanders tried to combat superstition, but fatigue, disease, and fear proved stronger than discipline. Even among the officers, there were those who, half-jokingly, half-seriously, advised avoiding the ancient ruins and not disturbing the peace of the ancient kings. These sentiments permeated the very fabric of the army. Every step in the desert, every night spent among the ancient walls, seemed to the French to be fraught with invisible dangers. People lost faith not only in their own strength, but also in the very meaning of their presence there. And although the real causes of the disaster were disease, the grueling climate, and endless skirmishes with local tribes, in the minds of the soldiers, the losses were increasingly explained by supernatural intervention. Egypt ceased to be simply a territory to be conquered. It became a mysterious, hostile force that could not be fought with ordinary weapons. The curse of the Pharaohs became the unofficial explanation for the tragedy that had befallen the French army. Even many years later, the few who returned to France remembered Egypt as a place where the laws of the earth gave way to ancient and incomprehensible forces. By the beginning of 1801, the remnants of the once great French army were exhausted to the limit. Disease, thirst, endless skirmishes, and a sense of abandonment had reduced the troops to a state of complete exhaustion. The army, which at the beginning of the campaign numbered about 50,000 men, was reduced to a pitiful remnant. Napoleon Bonaparte had secretly left Egypt in August 1799, leaving command to Jean-Baptiste Kleber. The new leader had to hold on to what seemed like a hopeless mission. Kleber managed to stabilize the army's position for a time, winning several local victories. However, in June 1800, he was killed in Cairo by a fanatical assassin. After Kleber's death, the French situation became completely hopeless. They were surrounded by British ships at sea and Ottoman troops on land. Attempts at negotiation ended with demands for unconditional surrender. In August 1801, after long and humiliating negotiations, General Jacques-François Menou signed the terms of surrender. The French army had to lay down its arms and return to France on British ships. Only a small number of survivors were able to leave Egypt. According to official estimates, of the original 50,000 soldiers, Barely 15,000 returned home. The rest remained in the Egyptian sands forever, some buried in unmarked graves, others disappearing without a trace in the deserts. Today, historians attribute the army's disappearance to a combination of factors: epidemics, famine, climate, battles, and desertion. But for contemporaries, the disappearance of tens of thousands of soldiers seemed almost mystical. The French-Egyptian campaign went down in history not only as a military adventure, but also as a tragedy. It gave rise to a multitude of myths, legends, and fears, forever etching in the memory of mankind the image of an army swallowed up by ancient sands, as if by the earth itself, unwilling to let go of those who dared to disturb it. Egypt was not conquered. It swallowed up its conquerors, leaving behind only fragments of chronicles, rare artifacts, and endless questions to which history has never provided definitive answers.